You kissed me while I was out?" the rancher blurted. She smirked. "I saved your life, cowboy." The sun hung low in the wide Texas sky, painting the horizon with shades of orange and gold. Jake wiped the sweat off his brow with the back of his hand and squinted at the distant cattle grazing near the edge of the ranch. His boots were dusty, his shirt clung to him with sweat. And yet he moved with the ease of someone who had spent his entire life working this land. The ranch had been in his family for generations, and every fence, every barn, every patch of grass felt like a part of him. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of quiet that made a man feel both peaceful and restless at the same time. The birds sang faintly, and the wind rustled through the tall grass, carrying the faint scent of hay and leather. Jake's mind wandered to the work ahead, checking the fences, feeding the cattle, making sure nothing went wrong before the sun dipped completely behind the hills. He liked the routine, the sense of control he had over his small corner of the world. But today, something felt different. There was a stir in the air, a flicker of movement that made him pause. From the corner of his eye, he saw a figure walking along the dusty trail that led to the stables. She moved with purpose, confident and unafraid, despite the heat and the rough terrain. Jake frowned. Visitors were rare, especially strangers. He set down the rope he had been coiling and shaded his eyes, trying to get a better look. Her hair caught the sunlight, shining like dark copper, and her steps were deliberate, almost like she belonged here, though he knew she didn't. "Hey!" Jake called out, his voice rough from the dust and sun. "You lost?" The woman paused and looked up, her green eyes meeting his with a calm, steady gaze. She smiled slightly, the kind of smile that didn't need words to make an impression. "I'm Lila," she said, her voice clear and warm. "I'm a wildlife medic from the town nearby." "I heard there were some injured horses around here. I thought I'd check." Jake raised an eyebrow, unsure whether to be annoyed or impressed. He had handled plenty of situations alone, and the idea of someone wandering onto his land without asking didn't sit well with him. Yet there was something in her tone that made it hard to be angry. She didn't demand anything, didn't make any assumptions. She just stated the facts, simple and clear. "Well, you picked a busy day," he muttered, scratching his neck. "The cattle are restless, and I've got fences to check before sunset." "Injured horses, huh? Where exactly?" Lila tilted her head and gestured toward the far paddock, near a clump of mesquite trees.
"I spotted one while driving by earlier."
"I thought I'd see if I could help." Jake's eyes followed her gesture. The paddock was uneven, and the sun had cast long shadows across it, hiding dips and holes that could easily trip a careless person. He felt a surge of protectiveness, not because he wanted to scare her off, but because he knew how dangerous the terrain could be. "You sure you can handle yourself?" he asked, his tone softer than before. "That horse might be skittish." Lila smiled again, a little mischievously this time.
"I handle skittish animals all the time. Don't worry about me." Jake shook his head, half amused, half wary.
"All right, then. Come on. I'll show you where it is. But stay close." As they walked, Jake couldn't help but notice the ease with which Lila moved. She didn't stumble over the rough ground, didn't hesitate when the cattle snorted or shifted nearby. Brash. She had a calm confidence that made him relax just a little, even though he didn't like admitting it. The paddock was quiet except for the low murmur of the herd.
Jake pointed toward a brown horse with a limping gait, favoring one leg.
Lila knelt down carefully and began inspecting it, her hands gentle but firm. She murmured soothing words to the animal, and even Jake had to admit it was impressive how quickly the horse seemed to calm in her presence.
Looks like a sprain, she said after a moment. Nothing broken.
I can bandage it, but it'll need rest for a few days. Jake nodded, watching her work. There was something about her determination, her focus, that made him feel a strange mix of admiration and curiosity. Most people in town would have seen a limping horse and shrugged, but she had come all this way to help.
You really didn't have to do this, he said quietly.
I know, she replied, glancing at him with a playful smirk. I just thought someone should. For a moment there was silence between them, filled only by the soft sounds of the ranch. Jake felt an unfamiliar sense of ease, a rare pause from the constant responsibility he carried. He wanted to say something else, something witty or meaningful, but the words wouldn't come. Psst. Instead, he found himself just watching her, noticing the way the sun highlighted her features, the way she moved with confidence, the faint smirk that hinted at a sense of humor he hadn't yet discovered. As they finished tending to the horse, the sky began to shift toward the deep oranges and purples of sunset. Jake was packing up the supplies when a sudden commotion erupted nearby. One of the other horses had spooked, kicking at the fence in a panic. The noise startled the animals, and in the chaos Jake stepped backward without noticing a loose plank. Before he knew it, he tripped and fell against the fence. A loud crack echoed as the wood splintered under his weight, and he stumbled into a sharp edge, cutting his leg. Pain shot through him, and he realized he had fallen awkwardly, his shoulder pinned under part of the broken fence.
Jake! Lila's voice rang out sharply.
She dashed toward him, her boots kicking up dust as she reached him in seconds.
Hold on! Don't move too much. Jake tried to protest, to tell her he was fine, but the pain made it impossible. Lila didn't hesitate.
She knelt beside him, assessing the situation quickly. She instructed him to stay calm, then carefully lifted the plank just enough to free his shoulder without causing more injury. You okay? She asked, her eyes scanning him for any serious damage. Jake gritted his teeth, trying to hide the pain. Yeah, I'll survive, he muttered, though his voice betrayed him. Lila rolled her eyes, clearly unconvinced.
You're not moving until I check that leg. You're lucky it's just a cut and a bruise.
Could have been worse. As she bandaged him, Jake couldn't help but notice how calm she remained, how instinctively she handled the situation. It was strange, almost frustrating to feel both impressed and slightly embarrassed.
Here was a woman he barely knew, yet she had literally saved him from what could have been a serious accident.
When she finished, she stepped back and gave him a small, teasing smile. There. That wasn't so bad, was it? Jake looked at her, still catching his breath, and for a moment he felt words fail him. Then, before he could stop himself, she leaned in impulsively and kissed him. Soft but urgent, a mixture of relief and instinct. Jake froze, eyes wide. When he finally found his voice, it came out as a shocked blur. You kissed me while I was out? Lila smirked, tilting her head slightly. I saved your life, Cowboy. Consider it a reward. Jake couldn't help but chuckle, despite the pain and the embarrassment. There was something in her gaze, fierce, confident, and teasing, that made him forget just for a moment the worries and responsibilities of the ranch. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of red and gold, Jake and Lila stood there, a little awkward, a little stunned, but undeniably connected by the afternoon's events. The ranch was quiet again, the cattle grazing peacefully, but something had shifted.
A day that began like any other had turned into something neither of them would forget. Jake realized as he helped Lila gather the supplies that this encounter was more than a simple act of kindness.
It was the start of something unpredictable, something exciting. And as he looked at her confident smile, he couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. on the ranch, in his life, and in a heart he didn't quite realize was ready to be stirred.
The evening air grew cooler and the first stars began to appear, twinkling like distant promises.
Jake walked alongside Lila, feeling an unusual mix of gratitude, curiosity, and a strange warmth that lingered where her lips had touched his.
The ranch had always been his world, but for the first time he felt it expand just a little, made brighter by someone unexpected, someone daring, someone who had literally saved his life that day. Batasa. And though neither of them knew it yet, the events of this day were only the beginning. A story had started to unfold, one of courage, connection, and the unpredictable spark that could ignite between two people when the world suddenly made room for something extraordinary. The next morning, the ranch was bathed in a soft golden light, the kind that made the dust in the air glow like tiny stars. Jake stirred early, as he always did, the rhythm of ranch life already in his bones. Yet today, something felt different. His shoulder throbbed faintly from the fall, and he couldn't shake the memory of Lila's kiss. He tried to tell himself it was just a reflex, an adrenaline-fueled moment. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. So, Jake moved around the barn quietly, tending to the cattle with the practiced ease that came from years of experience. Yet every sound, every shadow seemed to remind him of her presence. He had never been one to be easily distracted, but the thought of Lila made his chest tighten in a way he wasn't used to. Meanwhile, Lila was already making her way to the ranch, a small bag slung over her shoulder. She had been thinking about the injured horse she had treated yesterday, making sure she had brought the right supplies for the follow-up. But truthfully, she was also thinking about Jake. There was something about him. His stubbornness, his quiet strength, the way he seemed to carry the weight of the ranch without complaint, that intrigued her. When she arrived, Jake was already outside, checking the fences near the far paddock. He looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. There was a flicker of recognition, of shared understanding, and then a small, almost shy smile from Jake.
Lila returned it, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Morning," Jake said, his voice gruff but not unkind.
You didn't have to come back so early. I wanted to check on the horse, Lila replied. It's not a bad morning for a walk anyway. Jake nodded, though he suspected her motives were more complicated. He gestured toward the paddock. Follow me. The horse should be fine, but it's better to check. As they walked, the air was filled with the quiet sounds of the ranch waking up. Chickens clucked near the coop, and the cattle moved lazily, lowing softly. Lila noticed how Jake moved naturally among the animals, speaking to them in low tones, guiding them without force. There was a gentleness to him that surprised her, hidden beneath the rugged exterior and rough hands. When they reached the brown horse, Lila knelt down again, examining its leg carefully. Jake watched her closely, noting the precision in her movements, the calm authority she held even over a nervous animal. He couldn't help but feel a growing respect for her skills. And perhaps something more... You're good at this? He said quietly, breaking the silence. Most people in town wouldn't even try. Lila looked up, meeting his gaze. I like helping Hamed. I don't mind a little challenge. They worked together in comfortable silence for a while, tending to the horse and making sure it was comfortable. Jake found himself talking more than usual, sharing stories of the ranch, of cattle drives, and the long hours he spent keeping everything in order. Lila listened intently, occasionally asking questions that showed she genuinely cared about what he was saying. By the time they finished, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the landscape. Jake leaned against the fence, watching Lila pack up her supplies. There was a pause, a moment where neither of them spoke, and yet the air between them felt charged with unspoken thoughts. You know, Jake said finally, scratching the back of his neck. I didn't exactly expect someone like you to show up here. Not that I'm complaining. Lila laughed softly, a sound that seemed to make the ranch itself lighter. And what kind of person did you expect? Jake shrugged, trying to play it off as casual, but his heart wasn't in the joke.
Bear. Someone who would stay out of trouble, he muttered.
Maybe someone a little quieter. I think trouble finds quiet people sometimes, Lila replied, her eyes twinkling.
Anyway, I like a little excitement. Jake couldn't help but smile. There was a spark between them, an easy banter that felt natural despite their differences. It was unusual for him to feel this way about anyone outside the ranch, but Lila was different. But she wasn't just another visitor. She was someone who had walked into his life, unexpected and uninvited, and yet somehow perfect for the chaos that surrounded him. The day passed with more shared tasks. Lila helped Jake repair a section of the broken fence, handing him tools and offering suggestions. At first, Jake resisted, accustomed to doing things on his own, but he quickly realized that her help was not only valuable, it was efficient and precise. Together, they worked like a team, their movements coordinated without needing to speak. During a break, they sat on a wooden fence, sipping water from their bottles. Jake's shoulder still ached, but the pain was secondary to the quiet moments they shared. He watched Lila's face as she scanned the horizon, noting the small lines of worry and determination etched in her features. Pest. She seemed strong, yet there was a softness about her that made him want to protect her, even though she clearly didn't need protection. You know, Jake said after a long pause, I'm not used to people sticking around. Most come and go.
I don't just come and go, Lila replied lightly. I stay if I feel it's worth it. Jake turned to look at her, surprised by her honesty.
Beth. There was a depth in her gaze, a sincerity that he hadn't expected. It was rare for him to feel understood, even by those closest to him. But with Lila, it was different. He felt seen, noticed, and for the first time in a long while he didn't feel the weight of the ranch pressing down on him alone. As the afternoon wore on, they continued with the chores, moving cattle, repairing fences, and checking on the other animals, desperate. Jake began to appreciate Lila's presence not just as help, but as a companion. She had a way of easing the hard edges of his day, making even the toughest tasks feel lighter. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a deep, soft orange again, signaling the end of the day. They stood together, watching the sun sink behind the hills, the ranch bathed in warm, golden light. There was a silence between them, comfortable and unforced, as if words were unnecessary to acknowledge the bond that was forming. You know, Lila said finally, breaking the quiet. You're not as stubborn as you seem. Not all the time, anyway. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. And you're not as fearless as you act. That horse, yesterday, you could have gotten hurt. Lila's smirk returned. I like to take calculated risks. Besides, someone had to make sure you didn't end up with a broken shoulder in the dirt. Jake felt a warmth spread through him, not from the sun, but from the simple truth in her words. Psst. She cared, in her own way, and he found himself caring back. It was an unfamiliar feeling, both exciting and slightly unnerving, but he didn't want to push it away.
As they began walking back toward the main house, Jake noticed the way Lila moved with confidence, the easy way she navigated the uneven ground. He admired her independence, her ability to step into a situation without hesitation.
And though he tried not to think about it, he couldn't ignore the memory of her kiss from yesterday. A flash of boldness that lingered in his mind like a secret he wasn't ready to admit aloud. The evening settled in with the quiet sounds of the ranch winding down. The cattle were grazing peacefully. The wind rustled through the trees, and the stars began to appear, one by one.
Jake and Lila stood on the porch, looking out over the land.
Neither spoke at first, content to simply share the moment. Then Lila nudged him lightly. Psst.
You know, you can at least admit it. That kiss yesterday, it was kind of exciting.
Jake laughed, a genuine deep sound that surprised even him.
Exciting? He repeated.
I was worried I'd get trampled. And yet, here you are, smiling, Lila teased. I'll take that as a compliment. Jake shook his head, smiling despite himself.
You're impossible. And you're stubborn, she replied.
Seems we're perfect for each other in that way. Jake didn't answer immediately. He only watched the stars appear, feeling a strange sense of anticipation. The ranch had always been his world, his safe place, but now it felt bigger, more alive, because she was there. Lila had brought something new into his life, courage, energy, and a spark he couldn't ignore. As the night deepened, they finally went inside, but the quiet bond between them lingered. Both knew that what happened yesterday was only the beginning, that the events of the day and the moments they shared had changed something fundamental. The ranch would go on, the chores would continue, and life would carry its usual rhythm, but now it carried something else too, a possibility, a connection, and the promise that neither of them had expected but both secretly hoped for. Bust. Jake lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Lila.
He tried to dismiss it, tried to tell himself it was just gratitude mixed with adrenaline.
But he knew better. There was something real there, something he couldn't ignore. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't mind feeling a little unsettled by it. And, far away, Lila was thinking the same, a smile on her face as she recalled the way he had looked at her, the small moments that spoke louder than words. Beck. She knew this was only the beginning, that life on the ranch and their lives were about to change in ways neither could have imagined. The next morning, the sky was painted in soft pinks and pale blues, the kind of sunrise that made even the most ordinary day feel special. Jake was already awake, walking along the edge of the pasture, checking the cattle. The early light shimmered on the dew-soaked grass, and the quiet hum of nature made the ranch feel alive in a way he loved. But even amidst the familiar routine, Jake couldn't stop thinking about Lila. Her presence had changed the ranch somehow. Even the work, which usually felt like a solitary rhythm of chores, now carried an energy that made him notice the smallest things. The sway of the fences, the low calls of the cattle, the wind brushing against the trees. Desperation. Everything seemed sharper, clearer, and, strangely, more exciting. Lila arrived soon after, her usual confident stride cutting across the dirt road leading to the barn. Bet. She carried a small kit with her, bandages, ointments, and supplies for the brown horse they had tended together. But as always, her eyes scanned the horizon first, taking in the land, the animals, and then settling on Jake.
"Morning," she called out, her voice carrying easily across the field. "Morning," Jake replied, straightening as he approached her.
He tried not to show how much he was thinking about her, but even the casual tone of his greeting seemed forced in his own ears. "You're up early," Lila observed, raising an eyebrow. "Cattle don't wait," he said simply, shrugging. "Neither do fences." Lila smiled, knowing she couldn't argue with that. Bay. She walked beside him as he began his rounds, carefully watching the cattle, making sure none of them were injured or sick. There was an ease between them now, a familiarity born from the shared work of yesterday and the unexpected intensity of that brief, daring kiss.
As they moved toward the far pasture, Jake noticed that Lila seemed more alert than usual. Her eyes scanned the area, watching the horses, the birds, even the distant hills.
There was a purpose in her movement, a careful consideration, and Jake couldn't help but admire it. She was brave, quick-thinking, and unafraid to act. Bess. It was something he valued deeply, though he hadn't expected to find it in someone who could also make him laugh and blush at the same time. When they reached the brown horse, Lila knelt down again to check its leg. Jake watched her work, noticing the precision in her movements and the calm patience she exhibited. It was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, how she treated the animal, with both strength and gentleness.
You know, Jake said, breaking the quiet, most people would have left it alone.
You wouldn't. Lila looked up at him, smiling faintly. I didn't think it was right to leave an animal in pain. Besides, someone had to check on you too, she teased, a glint of mischief in her eyes. Jake's throat tightened at the memory of her kiss, and he found himself unable to respond. He cleared his throat instead, shifting his weight from one leg to the other. Lila noticed the change immediately, her smirk widening slightly. She knew that the kiss had left an impression, though she wasn't sure if he'd admit it aloud. They finished tending to the horse and began walking back toward the main barn. The air was filled with the scent of fresh hay, dust, and the faint aroma of wild flowers from the fields beyond. The silence between them was comfortable, though beneath it, a tension lingered. Neither of them wanted to address it yet, but both were acutely aware of the magnetic pull growing stronger with every shared glance. Suddenly, a loud whinny broke the peaceful morning. One of the horses had gotten loose, panicking near the edge of the pasture. The herd started to scatter, and before Jake could react, he saw Lila sprinting toward the chaos, moving faster than he thought possible. Lila, wait, he shouted, but she didn't slow down. Jake's heart raced as he ran after her. This wasn't a time to be cautious. The horses could injure themselves, or worse, trample her if she didn't act quickly. Lila reached the lead horse, her voice firm yet calming as she spoke to it, guiding it away from the other animals. She moved with confidence, her body tense but controlled. Jake realized just how skilled she was, and a surge of admiration and concern rose in him. Careful! He shouted, running up to help Rahep. Together, they guided the horse back toward the corral, their movements synchronized, almost instinctive. It was dangerous work, and at one point Jake caught a glimpse of fear flash in Lila's eyes, quickly replaced with determination. Brace. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only a few minutes, the herd settled down and the loose horse returned safely to the corral. Both Jake and Lila stood there, breathing heavily, sweat dripping down their faces, and yet neither of them moved away from the other. You're reckless, Jake said, his voice a mix of scolding and awe.
I'm careful, Lila replied, smirking despite the adrenaline still pumping through her.
I know what I'm doing.
Jake shook his head, unable to hide the smile tugging at his lips. You're impossible, and you're stubborn, Lila countered, her green eyes sparkling.
Psst. Seems like a good match, don't you think? Jake's chest tightened at the words. He wanted to argue, to brush it off, but he couldn't. There was truth in what she said, and, more importantly, he felt it deep down. They were alike in ways he hadn't expected, stubborn and determined, but also strong and willing to act when it mattered most. Bad. Later, as they walked back toward the barn, the tension between them shifted into something softer, more intimate. Jake found himself stealing glances at her, noticing the way her hair caught the light, the way her smile lingered even after a laugh, and the way she moved with a confidence he couldn't stop admiring. Lila, on her part, felt a strange thrill in being near him. Jake was rugged and strong, yet there was a gentleness to him she hadn't anticipated. The kiss from yesterday still lingered in her mind, not as an isolated moment, but as the beginning of something she didn't quite understand yet. She wanted to see where it could go, to explore the connection growing between them. By mid-afternoon, they were taking a break, sitting on the edge of the barn's porch with iced tea in hand. The ranch stretched out before them, the hills rolling gently, the cattle grazing lazily. The wind carried the faint scent of wild flowers, and the quiet sounds of nature surrounded them. Jake turned to her, hesitating for a moment. You know, Bay, I can't remember the last time someone just showed up and shook things up like you have. Lila laughed softly, the sound light and musical. Bay. Good or bad? Jake smiled, though it was tinged with seriousness. Good. Definitely good. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of comfortable silence that spoke more than words ever could. Jake felt a strange warmth in his chest, a mix of gratitude, admiration, and something else he couldn't name yet. Lila felt it too, the quiet pull between them, the unspoken understanding that their connection was growing stronger with every passing moment. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jake finally broke the silence. You know, he said quietly, yesterday, desk, that kiss, I haven't stopped thinking about it.
Lila's heart skipped a beat, and she smiled, leaning slightly closer.
B. Neither have I, she admitted softly. Jake felt a rush of courage, the kind that comes only when you've been holding back long enough. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and she didn't pull away. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the world seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the two of them, the ranch and the fading light of the evening. You're something else, Jake murmured, his voice low, almost a whisper. And you're not so bad yourself, cowboy, Lila replied, her smirk softening into something gentler, more sincere. But the moment stretched, unbroken, filled with unspoken promises and the thrill of discovery. Neither of them knew exactly what the future held, but both felt it in their bones that this connection, sparked by danger and sealed with a bold kiss, was only the beginning. As night fell, the stars twinkled above and the ranch was quiet once more. But for Jake and Lila, the day had changed everything. They had faced chaos together, shared laughter, and admitted truths they had both been holding back. And as they stood side by side, watching the stars appear one by one, they both knew that what started as an unexpected encounter had grown into something neither of them could ignore. A spark that had the power to ignite into something far greater than either had imagined. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, spreading warm golden light across the fields and barns. Jake was already outside, tending to the cattle and checking the fences. His movements were steady and confident, but his mind kept wandering back to Lila. Ever since yesterday, he found himself thinking about her constantly, her smirk, her daring nature, the way she had kissed him without hesitation. He tried to focus on his work, but the memory lingered, making even simple tasks feel more complicated. Lila arrived soon after, carrying her medical kit and a sense of purpose that seemed to fill the air around her. She had spent the morning checking the local wildlife for injuries, but the thought of helping Jake with the ranch chores had been on her mind ever since she woke. There was something about him, his quiet strength, his stubborn nature, and the vulnerability he had shown when she had saved him, that made her want to be around him. "Morning," Jake greeted, trying to sound casual.
Morning, Lila replied, smiling. Looks like a busy day.
Jake nodded.
Always is. Want to help? Lila laughed softly. I thought you'd never ask. Together they walked across the pasture, their movements in sync as they checked the fences and guided the cattle. There was an ease between them now that hadn't existed before. Yesterday's kiss had shifted something, but neither had rushed to define it. Instead, they allowed the moments to build naturally, letting trust and familiarity grow with each shared task. As they reached the far pasture, Lila noticed a calf limping slightly. She knelt down to examine it, her hands gentle but firm, and Jake watched her, impressed once again by her skill and confidence.
You have a way with animals, he said, breaking the silence.
They can tell when you're nervous or unsure, Lila replied.
You just have to stay calm and be patient. Jake nodded thoughtfully. I've learned patience the hard way. Lila smiled at him, a small, knowing smile that made his chest tighten.
There was something in the way she looked at him. Curious, admiring, yet playful, that made him feel seen in a way he rarely experienced. After checking the calf, they continued with the morning chores, bed. They moved fences, fixed broken boards, and guided the cattle back toward the barn. Each task was demanding, yet neither complained. Bear. Instead, they found themselves laughing at small mistakes, teasing each other, and sharing quiet moments of understanding. By midday, the sun was high and the heat pressed down on the ranch.
Jake suggested they take a break, and they sat together under the shade of an old oak tree.
Lila pulled out a small notebook and began jotting down notes about the injured animals she had treated earlier, while Jake leaned back against the tree, watching her with a mix of admiration and curiosity. "You really are thorough," he said after a moment.
I like to keep track, Lila replied, not looking up. It helps me remember what each animal needs, and it keeps me organized. Jake smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest.
"You're amazing," he said quietly, almost to himself. Lila looked up, her eyes meeting his. "I could say the same about you," she said softly, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, filled with the unspoken connection that had grown between them. The peaceful moment was interrupted by a sudden commotion near the barn. One of the horses had gotten tangled in a fence, struggling and panicking. Jake sprang to his feet, and Lila followed closely behind. Together they worked quickly and efficiently, calming the horse and freeing it from the broken fence. The adrenaline surged through them both, and in the heat of the moment they found themselves laughing at the chaos, their earlier tension replaced by a shared sense of accomplishment. After the horse was safely back in the corral, Jake turned to Lila, his chest still racing from the excitement. "You really do throw yourself into things," he said, shaking his head with a grin. "And you're not so bad yourself," she replied, her eyes sparkling. "I like that about you." They shared a quiet moment, standing close together as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The warmth of the day lingered on their skin, and the gentle breeze carried the faint scent of wildflowers and hay. Jake felt an impulse to reach for her hand, to bridge the space between them, but he hesitated, unsure if she felt the same way. Lila seemed to sense his hesitation. She stepped a little closer, brushing against his arm, and Jake felt a thrill shoot through him. "You know," she said softly, "I didn't come back here just to help with the ranch. I wanted to see you again."
Jake's heart skipped a beat. He opened his mouth to respond, but found the words caught in his throat.
"Bear." Instead, he simply nodded, letting the silence speak for him. The connection between them was undeniable, and neither needed to rush to explain it. As evening settled in, they returned to the main house, tired but satisfied with the day's work. Jake offered to make dinner, and Lila helped, moving easily around the kitchen, her presence filling the space with warmth and energy. They talked and laughed, sharing stories from their pasts and dreams for the future. The more they spoke, the more Jake realized how rare it was to meet someone who understood him, who could match his stubbornness with wit and compassion. After dinner, they stepped outside to watch the stars appear in the night sky. The ranch was quiet. The only sounds the soft rustling of leaves and the distant calls of animals settling in for the night. Bay. Lila leaned against Jake, and he felt the steady beat of her heart, the warmth of her presence against his side. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying a mix of awe and vulnerability. "Beck. And you're not what I expected either." Lila replied, her voice soft but confident. You're strong, kind, and
Verse, but in a good way.
Jake chuckled softly, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. I think we make a good team, he said, glancing down at her. I think so too. Lila agreed, her smile gentle.
And maybe something more?
Jake felt a thrill at her words. He wanted to say more, to tell her how he truly felt, but the moment was perfect as it was. They stood together in silence, watching the stars, feeling the connection between them grow stronger with every passing second.
Over the next few days, Jake and Lila's bond deepened.
They worked side by side on the ranch, sharing both the hard labor and the small victories that came with it. They laughed together, teased each other, and slowly began to open up about their pasts, their dreams, and their fears. Jake learned about Lila's life in the town, her passion for helping animals, and the quiet strength that had driven her to become a wildlife medic. Lila discovered Jake's deep connection to the ranch, his sense of responsibility, and the gentle, caring man beneath the rugged exterior. One afternoon, as they were repairing a fence near the edge of the property, a sudden storm rolled in. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and the wind picked up, rattling the trees and sending dust swirling through the air. The cattle grew restless, and Jake realized they needed to move them to a safer area before the storm hit fully. Come on, Jake shouted over the wind, grabbing Lila's arm. We need to get the cattle inside. Lila didn't hesitate. Together, they ran toward the herd, guiding the animals with shouts and gestures, their movements coordinated and instinctive. The rain began to fall, heavy and relentless, soaking them within moments. The storm added a sense of urgency, but neither wavered. They worked together, trusting each other completely, their earlier tension replaced by the thrill of action and shared purpose. By the time the last of the cattle were safely in the barn, both were drenched and exhausted. They collapsed against each other, laughing despite the rain, and Jake felt a surge of admiration and affection for Lila. She had been fearless, determined, and entirely unafraid of the storm, just as she had been unafraid of him. You're incredible, he said, his voice filled with awe. And you're not too bad yourself, she replied, smirking, though her eyes shone with genuine warmth. As the rain continued to fall around them, Jake and Lila stood close, the storm outside unable to touch the bond that had formed between them. In that moment, they both realized that what had started as an unexpected encounter had grown into something far deeper, a connection built on trust, courage, and the shared thrill of facing life's challenges together. That night, as they dried off by the fire inside the barn, Jake finally allowed himself to be vulnerable. He reached for Lila's hand, holding it gently in his own.
I'm glad you came back, he said quietly. Lila squeezed his hand, her eyes meeting his.
Me too, she replied. I'm glad I didn't walk away. And as the fire crackled and the storm raged outside, Jake and Lila shared a quiet, unspoken understanding. They had faced danger, worked side by side, and discovered a connection that neither expected but both cherished. The ranch had always been his world, but now, with Lila by his side, it felt fuller, warmer, and more alive than ever before. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, turning the sky into shades of gold and pink. The air was crisp, filled with the smell of fresh earth and dew-soaked grass. Jake was already awake, walking along the fence line, checking the cattle. His movements were steady, but his mind wasn't on the chores. Thoughts of Lila filled his head. The way she smiled, the way she had kissed him, and the courage she had shown in the storm yesterday. He couldn't help but wonder what the future held for both of them. Lila arrived soon after, carrying her medical bag and a sense of energy that seemed to brighten even the cold morning. She had been checking on the nearby wildlife for injuries and making sure everything was fine after the storm. But most of all, She wanted to see Jake. She had felt a growing closeness with him over the past days, a connection that had grown stronger with every shared task, every moment of trust, and every laugh. "Morning!" Jake called out, trying to sound casual but failing just slightly. "Morning," Lila replied, smiling as she walked up to him. "Looks like the storm didn't slow you down." Jake shrugged. "Nothing slows me down for long," he said. "Cattle need attention and fences don't fix themselves." Lila laughed softly, a sound that made Jake's chest tighten. "I like that about you," she said. "You care so much about this place." He glanced at her, feeling something stir inside him. "I care about it and, I guess, the people who are part of it." Her smile deepened, and for a moment the world around them seemed to pause. Neither spoke, both feeling the pull that had grown stronger each day. It was more than admiration now, it was a bond, a connection that neither could ignore. The day began with routine chores, but there was an underlying sense of anticipation. They moved cattle to a new pasture, repaired fences, and checked the fields for any signs of damage from the storm. Working side by side, they communicated with little more than gestures and knowing glances. Each moment together felt natural, yet charged with the awareness of what had begun to grow between them. As the afternoon approached, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. A sudden storm threatened again, this time faster and more intense. Jake immediately knew they needed to prepare. The cattle had to be brought back to the barn, and any loose equipment had to be secured. "Let's move quickly," Jake said, his voice firm but calm. "This one's coming fast." Lila nodded, a spark of determination in her eyes. "I'm with you," she said, ready to face whatever came. Together, they guided the cattle through the pasture, their movements coordinated and instinctive. The wind began to whip around them, sending dust and debris flying. Bow. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by the low rumble of thunder. The storm was closer now, and the tension in the air matched the urgency of their task. Panicked near the edge of the field, and Jake ran toward it to calm it down. Lila followed closely, helping to guide the other animals away from danger. For a moment, the chaos seemed overwhelming. The wind, the rain, the frightened cattle. But they worked together with a silent understanding, each anticipating the other's moves. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only a few minutes, all the animals were safely in the barn. Jake and Lila collapsed against the fence, soaked and exhausted. They looked at each other, laughing breathlessly, despite the storm raging around them. "You're fearless," Jake said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Lila smiled, her eyes bright.
"We make a good team," she replied. "Better than I expected." Jake felt a surge of emotion.
He reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "Lila, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low but steady. "Bet."
"What is it?" she asked, meeting his gaze. "I've never met anyone like you," he said.
"Earth. You're strong, smart, brave, and you've changed everything for me. I can't stop thinking about you, and I don't want to. I like you. More than I should probably admit." For a moment, Lila just stared at him, her green eyes wide with surprise and warmth. Then she stepped closer, brushing a wet strand of hair from his face. "Jake, I like you too," she said softly. "More than I expected, more than I thought I would." "You're impossible to ignore." Jake smiled, relief and joy flooding through him. The tension of the storm, the fear, the adrenaline. It all seemed to fade in that moment. He leaned in slowly, and this time there was no hesitation. Their lips met in a gentle, lingering kiss, full of promise and connection. the kind that comes from shared trust and mutual admiration. The storm continued outside, but inside the barn, everything was quiet, perfect, and still. They pulled back slightly, foreheads resting together, sharing the warmth and comfort of the other's presence.
I never thought I'd find someone like you out here, Jake murmured.
And I never thought I'd find someone like you, Lila replied, smiling softly. Someone who cares, who fights for what's right, who makes me feel alive.
They stayed close, talking quietly as the rain pelted the roof above.
They shared stories of their pasts, dreams for the future, and small, intimate moments that deepened their connection. Ace, Jake realized that life on the ranch was no longer just about chores and cattle. It was about love, trust, and the shared journey with someone who mattered more than he had thought possible. When the storm finally passed, the sun began to peek through the clouds, casting a rainbow over the fields. Jake and Lila stepped outside, hand in hand, taking in the beauty of the ranch after the storm. The air smelled fresh and clean, and the animals began to venture out again, grazing peacefully under the soft light. This place is incredible, Lila said, squeezing his hand. Brace.
And it's even better with you here, Jake smiled, his heart full. It's my world, he said, but now it feels complete. They spent the rest of the day together, repairing minor storm damage, tending to the animals, and sharing quiet moments of laughter and conversation.
Every glance, every touch, every word carried a deeper meaning now, a promise of something lasting. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Jake and Lila stood together on the porch of the main house. The ranch stretched out before them, peaceful and alive, a testament to their shared work and care.
You know,
Jake said, breaking the comfortable silence.
I think this is just the beginning. I know it is,
Lila replied, leaning into him.
And I'm ready for it. As long as we face it together.
Jake pulled her close, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. Together, he agreed.
By always. The stars began to appear, twinkling faintly in the vast sky above. The ranch was quiet, the animals settled for the night, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. But for Jake and Lila, the world felt full of possibility, alive with love and shared dreams. They stood side by side, looking out over the land, knowing that whatever challenges came next, they would face them together, stronger, braver, and more connected than ever before. Bay.
As night fully settled in, they went inside, tired but happy. They shared a simple dinner and sat by the fire, talking quietly and laughing at the small things that had happened throughout the day.
Every moment strengthened the bond between them, a bond forged in danger, trust, and mutual admiration. Finally, as the fire burned low, Jake turned to Lila, taking her hands in his.
I don't know what the future holds, he said softly. But I know one thing. I want you by my side for it all.
Lila smiled, her eyes shining with warmth and certainty. And I want the same, she said.
They leaned in together, sharing another gentle, tender kiss, full of the promise of love and partnership. Outside, the ranch was quiet, peaceful, and alive, just as it had always been, but inside, two hearts had found their home in each other, ready to face the world together, no matter what came their way. And for the first time in a long while, Jake felt that the ranch and his life was truly complete. With Lila by his side, the days ahead were no longer just about work, cattle, and routine. They were about laughter, love, courage, and shared moments that would last a lifetime. The ranch stretched endlessly around them, the sun fully set and the stars shining brightly above. Jake and Lila stood together on the porch, hand in hand, hearts full, knowing that this was only the beginning of their story, a story of trust, bravery, love, and the unexpected magic that can happen when two people find each other in the most unlikely of places.